Thank you, everyone, for joining us to discuss really one of the most distinctive novels that, Indian or otherwise, that I've read in many years, and I'll come to what makes it so distinctive. I want to start, Sonora, with the question of genre. So your narrator, who isn't named, right? Yeah, your unnamed narrator tells us at one point that her favorite genre of cinema has become horror. And she refers to the new set of horror films directed by Ari Aster and how they combine grief with horror. And I was very struck by that because one of the things that your book does is combine so many different genres. The setup seems to be midlife rom-com. I won't ruin the ending. But then along the way, the journey, and you do deliver on the midlife rom-com, but the journey you take us through so many different genres. So how do you think about genre? Do you think of this book in any kind of genre?
I don't, and the reason is that I was just writing it as I went along. And I was definitely, it was sort of like a stream of consciousness thing almost, and I was thinking my way through. So the setup is that this woman in midlife decides that she's going to have a swayamvar after she's divorced 2 men already, and there's a lot of people have a lot of big feelings about this and are either very mad or are encouraging her and laughing at her as well, because like, who wants to marry this, what they call here, I guess, a dented, painted woman sort of. And so and she goes on. So that's it's a very rom-com sort of, unconventional, what in the US they're calling a sassy rom-com, which I hate. And so I set it up that way, but then it's also, clearly this woman has a life behind her, life that's lived, a life yet to come. And so where do we find this woman and how does she navigate everything? So then it becomes about the journey, which is what we are on, right? Like in midlife, there's this past and there's the future, and you're on this journey. And so it becomes about the journey to get to this idea of what feats will men perform in order to win the Swayamvar. And so that on that journey, she meets all these different people, she's changing her mind, she's afraid, she's excited, and so I decided to make it about this kind of a thought journey and the interiority. And so to answer your question, there really isn't any genre, but I hope this is a genre,
Yeah. And of course, the minute the reader hears, or the Indian reader hears Swayamvar, I mean, the American reader, I think you do a very deft and concise job of explaining to the American reader what this is. But for the Indian reader, think of Draupadi and her suitors, or we go back toward the realm of myth. And when we say journey, was that kind of mythical hero's journey also something you were trying to perhaps subvert?
Yeah, and the heroine's journey, which when I was teaching about the hero's journey to my students in the US, they said we want to learn about the heroine's journey instead of the hero's journey, and that's a very roundabout sort of journey, which was like, I was so glad that they told me that there is such a thing. As a feminist, I should have known that, but I went and I looked at that, and it's kind of like it's not a straight, or it doesn't have that arc that the hero's journey has, a straight and beautiful arc, and this one is sort of zigzag. You go take care of the kids, they grown up, then you come back to your own journey. So it is definitely doing that heroine's journey.
So, as we discussed, the book has a genre of its own, but what really propels it, I felt, was not plot, even though we do want to know what happens next or what happens in the end, but voice. It's an extremely vocal book, and the same is true, in terms of being voice-led of your previous novel, The Laughter. The difference is that The Laughter's voice was non-Indian, male, or sort of obviously distanced from yours. Here you've brought in lots of elements of your own biography, and readers even the readers who don't know you will be able to work that out. So I've got 2 questions about voice. The first is, did this voice just come naturally? Did it just emerge from you? And secondly, did you have to try to separate, your voice as a person, not as a writer, from this character's voice?
Both things. I should just say yes, and that would be the answer, but I'll expand on that. No, actually the answer to the first one is no, because the white man, so the laughter is written from the point of view and first person voice of a white a middle-aged male academic, an English professor in the US. And that, weirdly enough, came much more easily to me than this voice of this woman who's so much like me, right? And I wondered about that. I wondered about it when I was writing The Laughter, that why is this man's voice coming so easily to me? And the only thing I could think of is that growing up in India, we read so much Western white male literature that that voice was deeply internalized. And I was disgusted by that and trying to shake it off. But also then I said, okay, then why don't I use this to good effect, right? And I had to Americanize it, of course. And then for that I was reading all this American male literature just when the rest of the world is reading world literature. I was going back to all this stuff, but that's, for that purpose. And it flowed very easily, and I was kind of surprised and upset that I could think like a racist, misogynist white man. But this one, because there was this level of self-consciousness, right? I just felt like I don't want to make her too much like me, but also free her to live her own life on the page. And at the same time, give her my interiority, because I felt like I want my interior life to be on the page somehow. That's not a memoir.
Just to give the audience a sense of this voice. I mean, it's two things that really stood out to me about the voice. One is the humor, which is very crisp. It does have a sassy sort of Nora Ephron quality, but it is also Indian. It's not just Nora. Just like Nora Ephron is Jewish New York, this is a kind of Indian take, maybe on Nora Ephron. But like these great lines that also play with academic language, like I was enjoying the intersectionality of menopause and free time. Or so humor is one part of it. The other is the way you write, the way that she talks about male bodies. This is an incredibly sort of delicious example of that sort of underappreciated genre, the female gaze. We hear a lot about the male gaze, and she's kind of reclaiming the female gaze. And I love this description that you have of kind of the history of how she's looked at men's bodies. And you talk about how she talks about how she doesn't like the sight of men running because they're panting, but it's asexual. And it gives you a sense, like, she is such a. There isn't. I was thinking, I couldn't think of obvious precedents for the voice.
Thank you. And can we have a round of applause for this wonderful person who has such, like, Keshava, thank you. You have such a sensitivity to all the questions you've asked so far, and to know that this is decentering the male gaze, and I've only heard that from women, so thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. A part of it was to flip that around, and so I think I've written 7 pages. A friend of mine was like, she said 7 pages, and a guy in Seattle was like, that's a lot to devote to men in Seattle. Like, the men in Seattle don't deserve 7 pages of looking at them. But for 7 pages, she's just describing men and how she, what she's attracted to and what she's not attracted to. And I think I wanted her to have that, and to, again, it's really nice to know that that's unusual, that's not something you've read before, but for me, it's something I think about, and and I wanted to put that on the page so that we have this sense of a woman in middle age who's supposed to become invisible and fade into, being an auntie or being a grandma, but now she is actually in her sexual prime. Yeah. So she's in no hurry, so she's sort of able to like gaze out and describe them without any shame or any sense of temperance.
We talk a lot about we're constantly talking about the sort of the implications of generative AI for the novel, and one of the things that I think distinguishes fiction from written by humans is that individual eccentricity of voice. But actually, there isn't only one voice in this novel, because you make such abundant use of letters, and some of those letters are in very different, sometimes quite menacing voices. Tell us a bit more about the other voices in the book.
Yeah, so one of the voices is her cousin from India, cousin brother, is writing to her. She's read it and she's having a reaction. Thank you. Yeah, he is warning her. So, my dear sister, you should not be doing this Swayamvar nonsense. and you should be, have some shame, have some regard for yourself. People will laugh at you, and you have a curse on your family, and it is of intemperance, this curse, and you should save yourself. Come to India and work for, the mighty king here. And he's not calling him a king, but we will make sure that you are well taken care of. And if you have any physical needs, I will take care of those. So that is definitely a voice that I think will resonate for a lot of us. The brother, or somewhere a patriarch telling us not to not to stray and to take good care of ourselves. Whereas, yeah, so I wanted to play with that voice as a warning, and then also the visions that she's having from the past, and bring in all of that. Because, I think one of the things too, I left India much later in life than a lot of people do, and I am totally formed here as an Indian, and there's so much of that metaphor in me, including Bollywood metaphor we were talking about, and so I wanted to bring some of those voices in.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that in a bit. But taking up something you said about, it was a throwaway line, you said, I had to Americanize it, of course. And that leads me to a two-part question about readership, or who you're writing for. So firstly, how do you balance the needs of American and non-American readers? Because it's very clear to me reading this book that you are someone who isn't doing that straightforward, like India for an American reader. It's an American novel, but it's also a novel that Indians can read without thinking, the same for us. And secondly, female versus male readership. And I know you've thought about this a lot, partly because you have this line in your book about feminism being a loving call to boys and men, but also because you are the author of How to Raise a Feminist Son, not a novel, right? So you're someone who's thought more than most about, talking about these questions to boys and men. But your novel is written in the voice of a middle-aged woman, and novels in general are read by women between the ages of, women between the ages of 40 and 60 make up, 90% of the readership. I'm exaggerating, but we know who we're writing for. So how do you balance these different kinds of readership?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think I think about the reader when I'm writing. And I know that sounds fake, right? Because somewhere at the back of our minds there is a particular reader. With the laughter, with the previous book, I may have been thinking a little bit about white male America, because what I wanted to do was raise a mirror to white male America, or to white America, and say, look at yourself, right? And so I had to inhabit his voice and enter his interiority in order to do that, and there was some sense of that. But with this one, I definitely was not writing it for a typical American readership, or even that readership that you described of the middle-aged American woman, and because I know that in fact, while I was writing it, I was like, oh, here goes any chance at the awards, right? because I wasn't writing the saga. I mean, and I love those books, and I believe they are definitely well deserving of the awards and all the accolades that they receive. But I feel like I tend to break out of them, but whether I can help it or not, right? So I'm not writing the generational trauma saga. I'm not writing the Indian immigrant novel. I'm not writing the Indian novel either. I'm doing what feels right as I write. And I think that may be because my background is in journalism, and I don't expect to succeed in fiction writing. And so the thought of success or what genre I should write in doesn't grip me as hard. I just feel very lucky to be allowed into this club, So just writing from that point of view is sort of freeing. And then as far as the women thing is concerned, I actually hope men read it as well. If you really want to figure out what women are thinking, read women's books, right? Like read writing by women. And also if you want to know how to be a better human being. So.
I also find, at least in contemporary fiction, and this is completely contrary to stereotype, but I do think on average, books by women are much funnier. Because they're more alive to the ridiculous, which is a crucial part of humor.
Because we're paying attention, and when you pay attention, you see the absurdity of life, right? And when you see the absurdity of life, you can describe it, right? So.
So this book has it has a very particular structure, which is you tell us on the first page of the book what's going to happen, sort of. You make a promise. The promise is, I'm going to hold a Swayamvar. And that's a big promise. And because the reader knows that this is the structure of the story. And the reader expects maybe a certain kind of story. And then your book goes in different directions. In the process of writing it and editing it, because you sort of described how you just wrote it as it came, but in the process of editing it, did you have to then really be alive to plot and pacing and just how to deliver on that promise?
Yeah. Have you been an editor as well?
Not a fiction, but I've written more novels.
Right. Yeah. My editor had to point that out to me, saying like, "Hey, you remember what you promised the reader in the first couple of chapters? What's going on here?" So I did have to do that in the second and third draft, because I just went off on my own thing and it was like, "Oops, the Swayamvar," right? In fact, that chapter is called "Oh and the Swayamvar" at the end, right? So because I wanted to show that it was about the journey, but also those readers who come in for the delight of the Swayamvar should also have some of the Swayamvar. And so then I actually enjoyed writing that chapter. I had written a shorter version of it, and a friend of mine who read an early draft for me said he wanted to throw the book across the room because I didn't deliver on the Swayamvar promise. And I was like, oh my God, if my friend is thinking this, then I wonder what the readers are going to do. So, and on Goodreads, I read all the reviews on Goodreads. Please put your reviews on there if you do read it. But I always read the reviews because it's my way of like having some conversation with readers, right? Or at least knowing what's going on for them. And I do see some of them are like, no, I wanted more about the Swayamvar. So, but I had to go in and tweak it to deliver on that promise and bring that as a promise back on, into the plot. And I'm glad I did it. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about Hindi, because you mentioned, we were speaking previously, that your parents named you as a literary reference to Urdu writer Krishna Chandra. And this book is so full of references to Hindi film and cinema, Hindi music and cinema. And whether it's, I think the narrator has somewhat questionable, can sometimes show questionable taste in music, but she has a real love. Okay. I'm referring to her love for the song Bindiya Chamkegi.
I think Bindiya Chamkegi is a great song. Anyone here know the song Bindiya Chamkegi? Love it, right?
And
yeah, it's so beautiful. It's a feminist song. It's a feminist song. Get with the times. But one of the things that I loved is that, I don't know if any of you have read this essay by Mukul Keshavan called "The Ugliness of the Indian Male." And it's a great sort of parallel, your book versus his essay. They're both very good in different ways, but that is all male gaze, because it's basically, one of his points, a lot of it is about how, the male stars in Hindi cinema are so unattractive. And you kind of restore the female gaze in your kind of, it's like cultural criticism, the way you talk about the Bollywood male bodies. But tell me about the role of Hindi in your life. Also, of other languages. I mean, did you grow up speaking Maithili as well? No, I understand Maithili. That's what my parents spoke when relatives came. But we grew up in Bombay, and my dad was in the army, so we were speaking Hindi and English. So I speak more Hindi then. Yeah.
Yeah, but do you think that Hindi informs your sensibility?
Yeah, it does. And when I lived in Bangalore, actually, my former sister-in-law is here, and she'll say that I used to speak some Tamil as well, right? Remember that? Yeah. But yes, Hindi, definitely. Hindi and Hindi cinema are, I don't know where I end and it begins, or where that ends and I begin, because it's like a constant reference point, and it's deeply embedded in me. Yeah. So I make references to Hindi films all the time, yeah.
I want to open up to the audience, but I've got one final question before we do that, which is just to reflect on, the place of your new novel in your evolving career, because you've written nonfiction, you started out as a journalist, became an academic, you've written nonfiction, memoir, and now you've written 3 novels, and your first novel, which came out 12 years ago, you said is now being reissued, and you've had a chance to go back and look at that again. So tell us about how you feel about where you are as a novelist right now.
I'm absolutely loving it. So I was a journalist for 10 years in India before I moved to Singapore and then to the US. And out of that 5 years was as a journalist here at the Times of India, Bangalore. And that was from 92 to 97 when Bangalore was changing a lot and we did a lot of really good journalism. So I had to defer. I mean, I always wanted to write fiction, but I had to defer that dream for a long, long time. And then I went to the US and became an academic on tenure track. That takes 6 years of academic publishing, which is really boring stuff. And, so in order to be a tenured professor and everything. And then the desire to write fiction, sort of surfaced again. And so, as I said before, I just feel very fortunate to be allowed into that club in which you can write fiction. And I was doing it sort of as a guilty pleasure because as a communication and media professor, you're not supposed to write fiction. And I was still taking that risk. And you know how it is so compartmentalized in US academia and academia in general. And so there were a lot of people that were warning me not to do it. And now the university has come around to encourage more professors to do this work. There are more of them to do this work, and they've given me an endowed professorship. So that's just to say that you just keep following your dream no matter how people are warning you, like the cousin brother, that you shouldn't be doing it. There are, American cousin brother types as well. So just keep following your dreams as much as you can, and the world will come around to seeing why it's important.
Great. On that very invigorating note, who would like to ask the first question? We have a mic that'll go around.
Do we have questions from the audience?
I'm sure we do.
Please raise your hands. We'll come there with the mics.
There's a bird there that has a question. There's a bird.
I put on the question, in case. Yeah. There we go.
I think my voice is loud enough.
Hi, Dilshad.
So, I've known Sonora for the last more than 35 years. And we were in college together in Bombay. And she was an amazing writer even then. We were a group of 10 of us that had written a video script. We would sit all night. By morning, the script has been torn and thrown away because Sonora thought it was crap. And then she would rewrite the whole thing. I haven't read Intemperance, unfortunately, but I did read parts of your book, Raising a Feminist Son, and I absolutely loved it. And I know how you brought up your little boy. I've seen stories, heard stories from you. And in retrospect now, what do you think? Do you think Indian mothers, I've gifted that book, by the way, to probably 12 or 15 of my friends, everyone who has a son. And I urge all Indian mothers to read it.
And fathers.
And fathers, yeah. But in India, unfortunately, it's the mothers. The fathers have very little to do with it. So how do you think it came about in terms of how's he grown up now? Has he read the book is what I wanted to know. I've always wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, no, he promised me he wasn't going to read the book. And he said, I won't read it because while you're writing it, I don't want you to have me as an editor in your mind. I don't want you to think that, oh, I'll feel bad about this or whatever. You have freedom to write about anything up to the age of 18 for me. That was an interesting thing, that he only wanted me to write about him. After that, he has all his stories and his secrets are his own. So how did it come about? How has it turned out? It's turned out really well. He is a feminist, and he's not one of those performative feminists who's like calling himself a feminist and running around. He is seen and experienced as a feminist by the women in his life, including me. He will not let me compromise, for instance, on my third husband. He says, you will not compromise, you will get a prince or nothing less. What he wants is for the best for his mom. So for a young man to have that sort of sensibility and to see his mother as a fully self-actualized woman in the world is a huge feminist act. And so I experience him as a feminist, and others do too. And that has actually then freed me to write these kinds of books as well, where there are intemperate women living full lives of self-actualization. Thanks, Dilshad, and so lovely to see you.
Question here in the front.
Hi, Keshava, got a chance to attend your talk at Shillong Lit Fest, so this question is inspired by that. I think one of you or the panelists said that the first novel tends to be autobiographical. In this case, since you wrote a non-fiction for your first one,
My first book was foreign. It was about farmers' suicides in India.
so sorry. Yeah. But with the previous book, The Laughter, it was a different voice that you written. Wondering if you resonated more with this, or how did that play out while you were writing this one?
Yeah, this one would be the most autobiographical. So it would almost be autofiction, but not really, because there's also sort of like metaphysical things going on, and those things don't actually happen or didn't happen to me. There are parts of my life that I have given her in terms of some of the structures. Like on the way, Keshava was asking me, so do you live in a houseboat? I don't think you do. And I said, no, I don't. How did you know? He's very perceptive. I don't. So, there were things that are leaps of imagination and leaps of faith in the book. But yes, this is the one that comes closest, even though How to Raise a Feminist Son is a memoir and is about my life, but that has a certain framework, and so I don't, there's not that much of interiority and what I think of. This one has more of that. But my first book ever was Foreign, which was about the farmers' suicides, and it had nothing of me in it, yeah, thankfully.
Okay, we're out of time here, but you can, if you have a question, you can obviously ask Sonora at the book signing. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonora.